They say history is written by the victors, but what if the truth was buried with the fallen? Every secret leaves a trace, if you know where to look. This is The Broken Truth, decoding history, one broadcast at a time. The Broken Truth podcast, where history meets conspiracy. Every case tells a story, every story hides a lie. Macon County, Alabama, 1932. The morning sun beats down on red clay roads as a tired young black farmer makes his way to a small rural clinic inside. The air is thick with the smell of antiseptic and the low murmur of voices. He removes his hat nervously. A nurse in a crisp white uniform smiles warmly at him. Eunice Rivers. A familiar face in the county, she calls his name and leads him in. In a gentle voice, Nurse Rivers explains that he's got bad blood, but the government doctors from the Public Health Service are here to help. They offer free treatment, a rare chance at medical care in these hard times. The man, who has been feeling unwell for months, heaves a sigh of relief. He can't afford a private doctor. And bad blood has taken friends and kin before, but today, he believes, help has finally arrived. Nurse Rivers guides him through a routine physical exam. A white doctor in a white coat nods approvingly as he checks the man's heart and eyes. They draw a small vial of his blood. The needle's pinch is quick. "You're going to be just fine." The doctor lies with practiced ease. He hands the man a packet of pills, tonics, and vitamins. Medicine, the doctor calls it. The man swallows the first dose right there, convinced it will cure what ails him. Nurse Rivers schedules him for a special treatment at the hospital in a few weeks. Something about drawing fluid from his spine. It sounds frightening, but she assures him it's for his own good. Trusting her completely, he agrees. As he heads out, the man feels a flicker of hope. The United States Public Health Service is looking after him. In exchange for a few visits, they've promised hot meals, free checkups, and even burial insurance if the worst happens. In the depths of the Great Depression, such generosity feels like a blessing. He walks home under the Alabama sun, clutching his packet of pills, believing he's on the road to getting well 40 years later. Washington, D.C., 1972. In a cramped newsroom, investigative reporter Jean Heller sits at her desk, a thin manila envelope of documents spread before her. Her heart races as she flips through typewritten pages marked USPHS Syphilis Study, Tuskegee. Line by line, a horrifying truth reveals itself. Hundreds of men in Alabama were never treated at all. The special treatments were sham procedures. The medicines were placebos. These men, the man in Macon County and many others, had been lied to and left to suffer for 4 decades. Heller's eyes widen, her stomach turns. Names and numbers leap out. 399 men with syphilis, 201 without, all used as unwitting guinea pigs. Many are dead now. Many others infected their wives, even their children. And the study is still going on. She pushes back from her typewriter, reeling. How could this happen in the United States? Outside the window, the Capitol dome gleams in the midday sun, a symbol of American democracy and justice. But here in her hands is evidence of a grotesque betrayal by a government agency sworn to protect public health. Heller steels herself, picking up the phone to make a round of calls. Officials dodge her questions. Doors slam shut. But she has the documents, and she has the truth. In a matter of days, this young reporter will break the story to the world. The headlines will shock the nation. Syphilis victims in U.S. study went untreated for 40 years. The long, dark secret of Tuskegee is about to be exposed, and the lives of those who survived will never be the same. Silence, then a deep breath. The tape recorder clicks on, and Heller begins to dictate her article. For 40 years, the United States Public Health Service conducted an experiment in which human beings were deliberately denied proper medical treatment. The words hang in the air like a thundercloud. The Tuskegee deception, a nightmare that began in 1932, is finally coming into the light. There are stories that grip the American conscience and never let go. This is one of them. It's the story of the Tuskegee deception, a 40-year lie crafted in the name of science, a betrayal of trust on a monstrous scale, and a reckoning that changed the course of medical ethics and public health forever. From 1932 until 1972, hundreds of African-American men in rural Alabama were unwitting participants in a government-run study that defies belief. They were told they were receiving free treatment for bad blood, a vague term that in those days covered everything from anemia to fatigue to syphilis. In truth, these men were denied treatment, even after an effective cure for syphilis was discovered. so that government doctors could watch the natural progression of the deadly disease. It was an experiment in deception, and its victims paid with their health, their sanity, and often their lives. Over those 4 decades, families were shattered. Wives contracted a cruel illness they did not know their husbands carried. Children were born with congenital syphilis, inheriting a burden of pain from fathers who only wanted to be healed. All the while, officials in the U.S. Public Health Service, the PHS, and the prestigious Tuskegee Institute, a historically black university in Alabama that lent its facilities and named the project, meticulously documented the ravages of untreated syphilis on the body. They compiled reports and statistics as the men grew sicker, and yet no one stopped the study. Not when penicillin became widely available in the 1940s, not when ethicists and doctors in the 1960s raised alarms. The study persisted in the shadows, a chilling open secret in some medical circles, but unknown to the American public, and certainly unknown to the men whose lives were being used as data points. How could this happen? The Tuskegee experiment was born in an era of profound racism and scientific arrogance. In the early 1930s, syphilis was a major public health crisis, especially in the Deep South. Treatment options at the time were limited and harsh. Arsenic compounds and mercury rubs that often did as much harm as good. African American communities, in particular, had high rates of infection and scant access to medical care. Into this gap stepped the U.S. Public Health Service with a plan that, at first glance, seemed compassionate. A program offering free testing and treatment for syphilis in Macon County, Alabama. The program was initiated in collaboration with the Tuskegee Institute, and it even attracted funding interest from the philanthropic Rosenwald Fund. But when the Great Depression hit and outside funding dried up, the PHS made a fateful pivot. Rather than abandon the project, officials decided to continue without treatment. What if, they reasoned, they simply observed the disease's course in black men to see if it differed from what was seen in white patients? What if they performed autopsies to glean final data on how syphilis destroys organs over time? Here was an opportunity, in their view, to conduct a long-term study in nature, watching an untreated disease run rampant. It would be the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male, and it would last 6 months. Or so they said. 6 months turned into a year into a decade, and then decades more. Through World War II, the Civil Rights era, and into the early 1970s, the Tuskegee study quietly churned on. The men in the study, sharecroppers, laborers, fathers and sons, continued to visit the Tuskegee Clinic. Many believed they were under the care of government doctors who had their best interests at heart. The deception was meticulous. To keep the subjects participating, the PHS doctors and Nurse Rivers provided small comforts and occasional treatments for minor ailments. A toothache here, a bad cold there. But for syphilis, the very illness destroying them, the men received nothing that could cure them. Instead, they got placebos, vitamins, aspirin, tonics, and reassurance. Always reassurance. For 40 years, nobody told them the truth. The truth that they were part of an experiment. The truth that they had syphilis. Many were simply told, "You have bad blood," and never even knew their true diagnosis. The truth that an effective cure, penicillin, existed after the mid-1940s and could have saved their health and perhaps their lives. The truth that the United States government, through the Public Health Service, was using their suffering to answer a scientific question no one had properly informed them about or gotten their consent for. This was not just a lapse in ethics. It was the calculated exploitation of a vulnerable community, fueled by racism and the cold ambition of certain doctors to obtain data at any cost. When the story finally broke in July 1972, Americans were horrified. The Tuskegee syphilis study, as it came to be known, quickly became synonymous with the abuse of Black Americans by the medical establishment. It prompted soul-searching and outrage. How many lives were ruined? Who was responsible? What could possibly justify this atrocity? The immediate fallout included Senate hearings, a class action lawsuit, and the abrupt termination of the experiment. But the repercussions didn't end there. The legacy of Tuskegee cast a long shadow. It eroded trust in public health, especially among African Americans. For generations, it directly led to new laws and regulations to protect human subjects in research, including the requirement for informed consent and the establishment of institutional review boards to oversee studies, and decades later, it would bring forth a poignant moment of reckoning. A U.S. president formally apologizing to the remaining survivors on behalf of the nation. In this episode, we will journey through this dark chapter of American history in 6 acts. First, the setup, where we explore how the stage was set in the 1920s and 30s for such an experiment to take root. A perfect storm of poverty, prejudice, and good intentions gone awry. Next, the experiment. An inside look at how the study was carried out, the daily routines, the lies told, and the lives ensnared in the name of science then, the cover-up, detailing how officials managed to keep the study going and under wraps despite mounting ethical concerns, and what was done to ensure the men remained untreated and unaware. In the leak, we'll follow the whistleblower and the journalist, the intrepid individuals who finally ripped the veil off the Tuskegee secret, bringing the truth to light. The fallout will examine the immediate reactions, the public horror, the government's scramble to respond, the legal battles, and the initial steps toward justice. And finally, in the legacy, we confront how Tuskegee changed the landscape of medicine and research, the lingering distrust it sowed, and how its lessons continue to echo in our society today. This is a story of trust and betrayal, of silence and exposure, of harm and healing. It is a story painfully rooted in the specific realities of Jim Crow America, yet its consequences are universal and enduring. The men of Tuskegee, fathers, husbands, brothers, have passed into history, but their ordeal stands as a grim reminder of what can happen when those in power decide that the ends justify the means and when racism twists the pursuit of knowledge into something evil. Now, let us go back to where it all began, to the dusty roads of Macon County in the early 1930s, when hope and desperation collided, and a cruel study was born under the guise of mercy. Macon County, Alabama, early 1930s, the heart of the Deep South, steeped in the hardship of the Great Depression. Cotton fields stretched to the horizon, worked by black sharecroppers who can barely eke out a living from the land. Segregation is the law of the land, and for the black community here, access to quality health care ranges from scarce to non-existent. Diseases like syphilis run rampant, a dreaded but common affliction that locals refer to as bad blood. In this time and place, a diagnosis of syphilis can be a slow death sentence. The disease might start with painless sores, but over years it can eat away at the heart, the brain, the sight and sanity of a person. Treatment in 1932 exists but is primitive. Doctors rely on injections of salvarsan, an arsenic-based drug, or mercury rubs, both of which are toxic and only partially effective, and even those treatments are out of reach for the poor black farmers of Macon County. Enter the U.S. Public Health Service, PHS. In 1932, the PHS is looking to launch a public health demonstration in the South, in partnership with the Tuskegee Institute, a respected black educational institution founded by Booker T. Washington decades earlier. The demonstration's original goal is noble: treat syphilis in the black population and thereby show the benefits of mass treatment. The Rosenwald Fund, a philanthropic organization, initially provides grants for syphilis control programs in several southern states, including Alabama. For a brief moment, hope blooms. Teams from the PHS and Tuskegee Institute conduct mass blood tests in Macon County to identify men infected with syphilis. Hundreds test positive. Plans are made to treat them with the standard therapies of the day. Nurse Eunice Rivers, an African-American nurse working with the Tuskegee Institute's hospital, is recruited to help with patient outreach and follow-up. At 32 years old, Nurse Rivers is smart, capable, and deeply trusted in the local community. She knows these families. She's visited their homes as part of previous public health efforts. Her presence lends a reassuring face to the program, but as fate would have it, the timing is terrible. The Great Depression is in full swing. The Rosenwald Fund suffers heavy losses and abruptly withdraws its financial support. Suddenly, the money for treatment and medicine evaporates in a meeting room somewhere. A pivotal decision is made. Dr. Taliaferro Clark, the initial architect of the study and head of the PHS Venereal Disease Division, had originally intended to treat the men after observing them for a short period. But now, with funds gone, Clark and several colleagues consider an alternative. What if, instead of a treatment program, this became an observational study? They have on their hands a ready pool of hundreds of syphilitic men who have never received treatment. A tragic but scientifically intriguing situation. Up in Washington, some see this as an unprecedented chance to learn how syphilis unfolds in Black patients from infection to the final stages. A racist notion pervades their thinking. Many white scientists of the day believe that the disease might affect Black people differently, that Black men are more prone to cardiovascular damage from syphilis and less prone to neurological damage, or that they wouldn't seek treatment anyway due to apathy or ignorance. These prejudices warp their morality. If these men are unlikely to get effective treatment on their own, so the thinking goes, why not use the opportunity to study the disease's natural course? It is a distorted justification, one that ignores the fundamental rights and welfare of the people involved. Dr. Clark is soon joined by others in shaping the study. Dr. Raymond A. Vonderlehr, a young PHS physician, is sent to Tuskegee to take over on the ground. Dr. Eugene Dibble, an African-American doctor who runs the Tuskegee Institute's John A. Andrew Hospital, gives the project his blessing, hoping it will bring resources and attention to his hospital. Even Robert Rusa Motan, the principal of Tuskegee Institute, consents to this arrangement, likely without grasping the full implications. The study is officially christened the Tuskegee Study of Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male. At the outset, approximately 600 Black men are enrolled, about 399 with syphilis and 201 without. The latter serve as a control group for comparison. All are African American, mostly poor sharecroppers and laborers from Macon County. Some are as young as 25, others are elderly. Many cannot read or write. Nearly all have never visited a doctor before this program. The PHS staff does not obtain the informed consent of these men, a concept that barely exists in 1932, and, even if it did, the officials likely would have sidestepped. Instead, the men are deceived from the very start. They are told simply that they have bad blood, and that they will be treated for it, free of charge. To entice participation, the government doctors make enticing promises. Free transportation to and from the clinic. Some men live miles away with no means to get to town. Free hot meals on the days they visit, a substantial perk in these hungry times. And free burial insurance, a dignified burial being a serious concern for poor families. These offers prove hard to resist. The men come in droves, grateful and relieved that someone cares enough to tend to their mysterious ailments. In an era when Black Americans are often turned away from hospitals or can only attend segregated, underfunded wards, the notion of a first-class clinic just for them feels like a godsend. Nurse Rivers is key to recruitment and retention. She personally goes out into the countryside in her Model A Ford, visiting churches and farmsteads. With her warm demeanor and respectable position as a Black nurse, she convinces families that joining this program is the right thing to do. She speaks in plain language that folks understand, never using the word syphilis, which might alarm or stigmatize, but instead saying bad blood. In the local lexicon, bad blood is a catch-all for illnesses that make you tired or weak, including syphilis, but also other conditions. That vagueness actually helps. It allows men who might be embarrassed to have a venereal disease to accept that they are simply getting help for bad blood. Rivers, Vonderlehr, and the others set up shop in a one-room schoolhouse for initial exams. Men line up fill out simple forms, or have them filled out if they're illiterate, get examined, and have blood drawn. When tests confirm that a man has syphilis, he is enrolled in the study and told he's lucky to receive special treatment. If a man's blood test is negative, he might be enrolled as a control, meaning he also gets exams and follow-ups to compare health outcomes. From the very beginning, lies are baked into the study's methods. One of the cruelest deceptions comes early. To properly understand how syphilis affects the neurological system, the doctors want to do lumbar punctures, spinal taps, on the subjects to collect spinal fluid. This is an invasive, painful procedure, and it's hard to imagine the men would agree willingly unless it was presented as something beneficial to them. So Dr. Vonderlehr comes up with a ruse. He circulates a memo describing the spinal tap as a special free treatment. Letters are sent out to the men. You will now be given a last chance for a second examination. This examination is a very special one, and after it is finished, you will be given a special treatment if it is believed you are in a condition to stand it. You have been selected because the Department of Health wants to do everything it can to get you well. The phrasing is intentionally misleading, full of half-truths that suggest benefit but conceal the real purpose. Nurse Rivers hand-delivers many of these messages, and often is the one who verbally persuades the men to undergo the spinal tap. She might not fully understand the scientific aims, but she trusts the doctors and plays along with the language they've crafted. If Dr. Vonderlehr calls it a special treatment, she will echo those words to the men with confidence and care. And so, by 1933, the Tuskegee study is fully underway. The initial treatment phase that Dr. Clark once envisioned has quietly been abandoned. Most of the men with syphilis receive at best some token doses of arsenic or mercury in the very beginning. Not enough to cure them, just enough to say something was given. And then nothing. In fact, as the study organizers soon realize, even giving a little bit of treatment muddies the waters. One PHS doctor, Oliver C. Wenger, points out that since many men got some therapy at enrollment, however inadequate, it's no longer a pure untreated study. But by then the momentum has taken over. They will continue regardless, as long as funding for periodic follow-ups can be scrounged from PHS budgets. The men, for their part, settle into the regimen of the study with surprising compliance. They come in for periodic checkups. Initially, every few months, they get their blood drawn, their weight and vital signs noted, their symptoms recorded dutifully on charts. If they complain of the classic signs of syphilis, perhaps a skin rash, joint pain, or trouble seeing, they are consoled but not actually treated for syphilis. They might be given aspirin for pain or iron tonic if they're anemic. Nurse Rivers becomes the anchor of the program. She shuttles men to the Tuskegee Institute's hospital for x-rays or tests, drives out to pick them up if they have no ride, and visits their homes if they miss an appointment. She addresses them as boys, a term that, while loaded in other contexts, is delivered with affection by her, almost like a term of endearment for her patients. They come to call themselves Miss Rivers boys, reflecting the familial trust that has developed. She is the face they see most. She holds their hand when needles go in. She chides them gently to stick with the program when they express doubt or impatience. Behind closed doors, in scientific papers, the researchers describe the men in terms that reveal their prejudices. They note the subject's low intelligence, poverty, and illiteracy as factors that in their minds justify the study. One early memo infamously states, these men's status, plus their lack of appreciation for medical care, make it unlikely they would obtain treatment even if it were available. This is how the architects of Tuskegee sleep at night, by convincing themselves that they are not taking away something these men would otherwise have had. It's a convenient narrative that ignores the obvious reality. The men came to them precisely seeking treatment, trusting the government's word. These officials also lean on a broader ugly ideology prevalent in that era, that African Americans are a notoriously syphilis-soaked race, as one public health doctor wrote, and that this study might eventually benefit Black communities by identifying whether they really need treatment at all. It is an astounding rationalization built on both racism and the cavalier disregard of human suffering. Within the first year or two, a few changes occur in the roster of people running the show. Dr. Taliaferro Clark, having set things in motion, retires and leaves. Dr. Vonderlehr, pleased with how the study is proceeding, the men are cooperative, the data are coming in, eventually also moves on around 1943. His protege, Dr. John R. Heller Jr., takes over the PHS venereal disease section and thus inherits oversight of the Tuskegee study. Dr. Heller is fully on board with the non-treatment approach. By the mid-1940s, he and others refer to the Tuskegee men not as patients, but as cases, or material, for the study. By the end of the 1930s, a decade has passed since the study began. Many of the men have now had syphilis for a decade or more. Some likely contracted it in the 1920s. What has this meant for them? Syphilis is a slow killer. In its late stage, it can lurk quietly, a phase called latent syphilis, during which a person might feel fine. But inside the body, the bacterium is doing damage. Some men begin to develop symptoms of tertiary syphilis, gummas, rubbery tumors, on their skin or internal organs, failing hearts, shooting pains in their legs from spinal cord damage, even signs of mental deterioration as neurosyphilis sets in. One man, in a particularly tragic case, has the infection settle in his eyes. He goes blind. Another suffers from tabes dorsalis, a degeneration of the nerves in his legs. Once a strong farmer, he becomes unsteady, then unable to walk without a cane. These outcomes should have been preventable. Had these men been treated early on, many would have been spared the worst. But now the disease marches on within them, unchecked. Some men do, in fact, die as the years pass. The PHS has a macabre procedure in place for that, too. Part of the study's design is to secure autopsies on every participant who dies, to glean the precious data from their corpses about how syphilis ravaged their bodies. In order to get consent for these autopsies, which families might otherwise resist, the PHS promises funeral benefits. Essentially, if you, the subject, agree that when you die we can perform an autopsy, we will cover your burial costs, sparing your family the financial burden. It's an agreement made years in advance, often signed by trusting family members who think, well, if doctor says it's important, okay. Nurse Rivers plays a crucial role here too, consoling widows and gently ensuring permission is honored so the doctors can cut and inspect the bodies of the deceased. For each autopsy, the PHS provides a polished coffin and a proper burial. A final thank you to their unwitting subjects. Sorry to interrupt your regularly scheduled podcast, but this episode is brought to you by the Broken Truth merch. Support the show. Wear the truth. Official Broken Truth podcast merch is live now. Links in the description. And since you've made it this far in the episode, comment #BrokenTruth and leave us a 5-star review on your favorite platform. Because when you speak up, the algorithm listens. And so does the world. By 1940, the Tuskegee study is firmly entrenched. It has survived the lean budget years of the Depression, in part because it doesn't actually cost that much to simply not treat people, and the on-site staff is minimal. Nurse Rivers and a rotating cast of visiting PHS personnel. The study even expands slightly. They add some younger men to replace those who died or moved away, keeping the number of subjects roughly steady. An air of routine sets in. The men come for their yearly blood tests and exams. They receive cheerful postcards from Nurse Rivers, reminding them of appointments in town. The participants greet each other and swap stories. Did you go up to Tuskegee and get your checkup? One might ask. Yes, I sure did. They say I'm doing okay. Another replies, not knowing that okay means his disease has quietly moved into a new phase without outward symptoms. In the minds of the men, these federal doctors are their benefactors. Some brag that they have a special arrangement, that they are being cared for by the government itself. Such an idea confers a sense of importance and pride, especially at a time when most white doctors wouldn't bother touching a black patient's case if they could avoid it. Unbeknownst to any of these men, they are now part of a scientific time bomb, a study that is accumulating outrage potential with every passing year it continues. But in 1930s, Macon County, there is no journalist peeking in. No community activists questioning the PHS's motives. The conspiracy of silence holds tight. Only the doctors and a handful of officials know the full scope of what's happening, and they are either convinced of the study's value or at least content to look the other way. At this juncture, let's pause to absorb the scene. A federal agency meant to safeguard health has, by design, allowed a group of men to carry a debilitating disease untreated. An esteemed black institution, Tuskegee, has been co-opted to provide a veneer of legitimacy and local acceptance. A nurse, dedicated to service, has unwittingly become a linchpin in a deceit, and a community has embraced a lie, hoping it was a blessing. The setup is complete. As we move into the next act, the years will roll on, and world events will shake the globe. Wars will be fought, medical breakthroughs will emerge, ethics codes will be written, and yet, shockingly, the Tuskegee experiment will continue. In Act 2, we delve into those ensuing decades, how the experiment unfolded and persisted, and what life and death looked like for Miss Rivers' boys as the doctors watched their bad blood run its tragic course. The experiment is underway, and time seems to slow down in Macon County as the years tick by. Late 1930s and 1940s, the world beyond Tuskegee is in upheaval. Economic recovery, then World War II. But here, many of the men remain unaware of anything beyond their own struggles. They still dutifully visit the clinic, some every few months, some only once a year, depending on their condition. The public health service doctors come and go in rotations, but Nurse Rivers is always there, the constant guiding hand. She is now effectively the field supervisor of the Tuskegee study, ensuring continuity. If a man misses an appointment, she climbs into her car and bumps along the dirt roads to find him. "How you feeling, Mr. Davis? You haven't been in to see us lately," she might say, standing on a sagging porch as chickens scratch in the yard. Maybe Mr. Davis was feeling discouraged. After all, he's been going for years and still feels sick. But Nurse Rivers cajoles him back. "Now you know we're taking care of you. Don't you want that free checkup? Come on in. I'll make sure you get something for that ache." And he will come, hat in hand, apologizing for skipping the last round. Such is her influence and the trust she's built. The PHS periodically sends down young doctors or interns to assist and collect data. For them, these trips are half field work, half hunting adventure. Literally, some later memoirs reveal that the visiting doctors spent mornings bleeding patients and afternoons hunting quail on the Tuskegee grounds. A grotesque juxtaposition of leisure and lurking tragedy. They compile notes and tables, recording each man's symptoms, how many years he's had syphilis, whether he's developed the dreaded complications like aneurysms or paralysis. They especially watch for the neurologic symptoms. If a man begins to have memory issues or personality changes, that is noted as possible neurosyphilis. If he complains of chest pain, they eye him for syphilitic heart disease. All of this is documented in dry medical language, but behind each entry is a man losing a piece of his life. One such man is Willie Johnson, a fictional name for a representative real case. Willie is around 40 when the study starts, a robust fellow with a wife and 2 small children. By 1942, Willie has been in the study for a decade. He can still swing a scythe to cut weeds, but he tires easily now. He's been having dull chest pains that he mentions to the doctor at an exam. They run an EKG on a clunky machine at Tuskegee's hospital. It shows some irregularities consistent with heart damage. The doctors quietly note that Willie likely has cardiovascular syphilis. The spirochetes have weakened his aorta, the main artery from the heart. Without treatment, he's at risk of an aneurysm or heart failure. Do they treat him now? No. They continue to watch. They want to see exactly how long it takes before that aneurysm might balloon or burst. Willie is essentially a walking experiment in progress. 1941 to 45 World War II. A number of younger men in the study register for the draft as American involvement in the war ramps up. This creates an unforeseen issue for the Tuskegee study. When men with syphilis are drafted, the U.S. Army typically tests and treats them. The military doesn't want soldiers with communicable disease, and by the 1940s, they know that syphilis can be effectively treated, initially with arsenicals, and soon with penicillin. Several Tuskegee subjects are called up and have their blood tests reveal syphilis. Under normal circumstances, these men would be handed over to Army doctors for prompt treatment so they could eventually serve, or at least not remain, a reservoir of infection. But the PHS researchers, fiercely protective of their experiment, intervene. They arrange for those on the list to be exempted from treatment. Astonishingly, they persuade the local draft board and military officials to let these particular men go untreated, and often, thus, not drafted into service. So as not to spoil the study's results, one internal PHS memo states in essence, "So far, we are keeping the known positive patients from getting treatment in order to continue this study on an effective basis." Imagine, a young man receives a draft notice. He reports for his physical, thinking he might join the army. The doctors there tell him, "Son, you've got syphilis. You need treatment." Perhaps this man is actually relieved. He doesn't want the disease. But then somehow the process halts. The man is quietly sent back home, told he's exempt from the draft due to his illness. And inexplicably, he isn't given any medicine for it either. If he asks the army doctors why not, maybe they mutter something about the public health service will follow up with him. He returns to Tuskegee, confused but still trusting. And indeed, Nurse Rivers, or someone will check on him and say, "Don't worry about that army doctor. You're already in our program. We'll take care of you." The irony is bitter. The war that brought many medical advances, including widespread use of penicillin in the mid-40s, glides past these men. They remain untreated by deliberate choice, even as around them an entire nation mobilizes in the name of fighting for freedom and humanity. 1943 to 1947, penicillin arrives. This is the thunderclap moment in the history of syphilis treatment. In 1928, penicillin was discovered. By the early 1940s, scientists refined it. And by 1943 to 44, it's being mass-produced, initially to treat infections in Allied soldiers. Doctors quickly realized penicillin is a miracle drug for syphilis, far more effective and safer than the old treatments. By 1947, penicillin is the standard of care for syphilis worldwide, and public health campaigns are underway to identify and treat syphilis cases en masse. To wipe out the disease, it's a watershed of modern medicine. For the men in Tuskegee, this should have been salvation. Many of them are now in the late stages of syphilis. True. But penicillin could still potentially arrest the infection, preventing further damage. At a minimum, it could ease their contagion, stop them from passing it to others, and perhaps ameliorate some of their symptoms. Tragically, infuriatingly, the PHS team overseeing the Tuskegee study doubles down. They choose not only to withhold penicillin from the men, but actively to prevent any outside doctor from treating them. Nurse Rivers is instructed that if any of her patients show up with penicillin injections given by a private doctor or a clinic, to report it one by one. The available lifelines are cut. Macon County holds occasional public health clinics distributing penicillin for syphilis. Tuskegee study subjects are quietly excluded from the list of those to be treated. The few who might independently seek a doctor's help are reminded by the study staff, "No, you must not take any outside medicine. It might interfere with our treatments." Again, the lie of omission, implying they are being treated, just in some other fashion. It is difficult to overstate the callousness of this at mid-century. By now, around 15 years have elapsed. Some of the original PHS figures, like Vonderlehr, have retired. The torch is carried by men like Dr. John Heller and Dr. Sidney Olansky, who directs the Venereal Disease Division in the 1950s. Within the Public Health Service, the Tuskegee study has a kind of quiet infamy, a long-running project that younger doctors hear about and might raise an eyebrow, but the establishment protects it. Periodically, reports on the study's findings are published in medical journals. These are bloodless academic articles, mentioning X number of cases observed over Y years, noting the percentages who have developed various complications. To the casual reader, it might even appear the men were volunteers fully aware of their role, because who would imagine they were not? But one man did imagine it. In 1965, a young doctor named Erwin Schatz from Chicago reads one of these published papers, a 1964 summary of 30 years of the Tuskegee study, and is horrified. Dr. Schatz writes a letter to the journal's editors and the study's authors, calling the experiment unethical. He cannot believe that in the 1960s, American doctors would leave men to suffer like that. The response to his letter: silence. Inside the PHS, one of the study authors notes Schatz's complaint and files it away with a curt annotation: no reply. The outside world's moral perspective is simply disregarded. But back in time a bit, let's return to the 1950s, to the actual on-the-ground experience of the men and their families. Many of the subjects by now have been carrying syphilis for over 20 years. Those who were in their 30s at enrollment are now in their 50s or 60s. Those who were older may have passed away or are in their 70s. The toll is visible. The study's own data, later revealed, would show that by the end of the 40-year run, 28 of the original 399 infected men died directly of syphilis, and around 100 more died of complications related to syphilis. At least 40 wives of subjects contracted syphilis from their husbands unknowingly, and 19 children were born with congenital syphilis. These are not just numbers. They represent devastating consequences. Consider the wives. These women were never part of any study agreement, even if one could claim the men loosely agreed to something. The wives likely didn't even know their husbands had syphilis, because the men weren't told. So when penicillin became available, not only were the men denied, but also their spouses remained at risk. If a man had been treated, his wife would be spared exposure or could be treated too by withholding treatment. The PHS essentially sentenced those women to possible infection, and indeed many were infected. Some suffered miscarriages or stillbirths. Syphilis can do that to pregnancies. Some had their own health destroyed, all while trusting that the folks at the clinic were helping their husbands. The ripple effect through families is quietly catastrophic. One such ripple, a child born blind. Congenital syphilis can cause blindness or deformities in infants. Imagine a woman in the late 1940s who watched her husband dutifully go to the Tuskegee clinic for years. She got pregnant. The family rejoiced, but the baby boy arrived with damaged eyes, destined never to see. The cause, though she doesn't know it, is syphilis passed in utero. Perhaps the doctors at the Tuskegee Hospital tell her something else, or maybe they never explain it at all. She might even blame herself, not understanding this was preventable. Had either parent been given penicillin in time? The cruelty compounds across generations. Through these years, the deception deepens. One might wonder, did none of the men ever suspect something was amiss? Surely, some did. There are recorded instances where a participant questioningly told Nurse Rivers, "I ain't never got no medicine for my bad blood. Just these pills that don't do much." When that happened, Nurse Rivers or the doctors would reassure them, "These things take time," or "You're getting the best care available." Remember, some of you did get mercury and arsenic back when we started. The men had little reason to distrust Nurse Rivers. She had been loyal and kind, even visiting them when they were hospitalized for other issues. Their alternative was what? No care at all, so they remained, anchored by a mix of hope, routine, and in many cases, lack of better options. It's also important to note that syphilis has variable effects. Some men, by sheer luck of their genetics or how the disease ran its course, remained relatively asymptomatic. These men might think, "I still feel okay. Maybe the stuff they gave me early on helped, or maybe I didn't have it too bad." Those who were severely ill, unfortunately, might have been too sick or too uneducated in medical matters to realize treatment was possible. One participant later recounted that he thought the government doctors had been treating him all along. Even when penicillin came around, he assumed the shots of tonic he sometimes got were that new medicine. Not everyone stayed in the dark out of ignorance, however. A few left the study. Records show some men dropped out over time. Some moved away. Some likely lost interest or grew skeptical. but the majority stayed until either death or until the bitter end of the experiment. All this time, the outside world's moral compass is slowly evolving. After World War II, revelations of Nazi medical experiments on concentration camp prisoners horrify the globe. The Nuremberg Code of 1947 lays down guidelines. Voluntary consent of human subjects is absolutely essential, and unnecessary suffering in experiments is to be avoided. U.S. representatives in Nuremberg helped craft these principles, and yet, on home soil, the PHS Tuskegee team does not reconsider their study in light of these new ethics. In fact, as late as 1969, even after the world has absorbed the lessons of Nuremberg and the Declaration of Helsinki, another ethics code adopted in 1964, the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, which by then oversees the PHS studies, convenes a panel to review Tuskegee. What spurred this review was internal rumblings, letters like Peter Buxton's, which we'll get to, and general discomfort. But incredibly, the panel, composed partly of health officials, decides to continue the study. Their justification: the men had already remained untreated for so long that they might as well see it through to completion, i.e., until all subjects had died and been autopsied. They reasoned that now penicillin in late-stage syphilis might be of less benefit. There is debate. While penicillin can't reverse existing organ damage, it can stop the bacteria. But if a man is already severely ill, perhaps curing the infection won't save him from damage done. Twisted logic settles in. Since we've already done wrong by these men for 37 years, what's a few more years? For a veneer of legitimacy, the CDC asks the American Medical Association, AMA, and the National Medical Association, NMA, the latter is an organization of black physicians, for their input. Shockingly, both the AMA and NMA chapters consulted give a nod of approval to continue the study. It's not clear how thoroughly they understood the study, or if they believed the men were at least being monitored humanely. But this stamp of approval closes the case internally, for the moment. Meanwhile, on the ground, the experiment's human toll continues into the 1960s. Many of the original men have died off, but a number are still alive, suffering chronic illness. One such survivor is Mr. Charlie Pollard, a real participant. Charlie joined the study in the early 30s and stayed in it for decades. By the late 60s, he's an old man now, living with the after effects of syphilis. Perhaps arthritis racks his body. Maybe he's had small strokes or heart issues due to the disease. Charlie still thinks the government was trying to help him. He has no idea he was part of an untreated study. When he feels especially ill, he calls Nurse Rivers, and she makes sure he can see a doctor for, say, his arthritis or blood pressure. In those instances, the doctors treat whatever secondary issues he has, but notably not the underlying cause they all know about. Charlie is one of the fortunate ones in a sense. He's lived long enough to see the 1970s many of his peers have not. Throughout this act, too, what becomes evident is the rhythmic cruelty of normalcy, how an unethical program can sustain itself through routine and rationalization. For the PHS staff, Tuskegee becomes just a long-term field project. New generations of PHS officials inherit it and likely don't question their elders' decisions. Nurse Rivers, for her part, grows older with her patients. She's in her 60s by the late 1960s, still tending to her boys. She's lauded within some public health circles for her dedication, completely oblivious to the fact that many will later judge her harshly as complicit in the betrayal. Did Nurse Rivers know the full scope? This remains a debated question. She certainly knew by the later years that penicillin could have treated these men. There is evidence she struggled with this knowledge, but ultimately, she deferred to the doctor's authority and perhaps to a sense of duty. In an interview years later, Nurse Rivers defended herself by saying the men received excellent care for ailments other than syphilis, and that by the time penicillin arrived, it was too late for it to help some of them. Whether that was her sincere belief or a retrospective justification, it underscores how even a person from the community, one of their own, became enmeshed in the deceit, perhaps convincing herself it wasn't so bad. By the end of the 1960s, the Tuskegee study's clock is winding down in a practical sense. Only a few dozen participants are still alive. The PHS has files thick with data, autopsy reports, and statistics. They have enough material to write up the final chapter of the experiment in a medical journal whenever they choose. It's as if they're waiting for the last few men to die to close the book on it neatly, and they might have succeeded quietly, had it not been for a chance meeting at a party in San Francisco, and the moral resolve of an ordinary public health interviewer who wouldn't let the issue rest. The secret, long held, is on the verge of leaking out. Our story now shifts from Alabama to the wider world. The experiment, horrifying as it is, has so far remained in the dark, but Act 3 will show how cracks began to form in the facade, how whispers and criticisms were brushed off, and how the PHS kept the cover on Tuskegee for so long. And then, in Act 4, we'll see that cover dramatically blown open by the whistleblower and the press. The years of quiet observation in Macon County are about to collide with the force of public outrage and accountability. The men in the study, those still living, are about to learn the truth of what was done to them. The Tuskegee deception cannot last forever. Before we move on, picture one last scene from the late 1960s, a reunion of a handful of Tuskegee study men at a clinic day. They sit on the porch of the hospital ward after their exams, gray-haired and weathered, perhaps teasing Nurse Rivers that she promised to make them young again and didn't deliver. They laugh, in that gentle, knowing way old friends do inside. A visiting doctor from Atlanta packs up blood samples to take back to the lab. He looks at these men through the window. They appear content, at ease. And maybe, just maybe, a pang of guilt strikes him, but he pushes it down. This is for science, he reminds himself, and he leaves Tuskegee, as so many doctors before him, without telling those men what he really sees when he looks at them, living embodiments of untreated, unnecessarily prolonged disease. As Act 2 closes, the stage is set for a confrontation between that hidden knowledge and the cleansing power of truth. The leak is coming. For nearly 4 decades, the Tuskegee study was cloaked not just in silence, but in an active cover-up maintained by the Public Health Service. How did it endure so long without exposure or intervention? The answer lies in a mix of institutional inertia, secrecy, and the troubling ease with which many individuals chose to look the other way. Act 3 shines a light on those who knew better, or should have, and on the few brave souls who questioned the study from within the system, only to be ignored or rebuffed. It's the early 1950s. The Tuskegee study has been running for 20 years by this point. Inside the PHS's headquarters, tucked away in file cabinets, are numerous reports and memoranda about the study. These are not public documents. They circulate among a select group of researchers. To the higher-ups, Tuskegee is something of an anomaly, a holdover from a previous era, but still delivering useful data. By now, the public narrative of syphilis control in America is one of progress and triumph. Penicillin drives infection rates down nationwide. Public health campaigns boast of curing thousands, but no press release mentions the cohort of black men in Alabama deliberately left untreated. That is a story kept strictly internal. One factor aiding the cover-up was, quite simply, the remoteness and demographics of the victims. Macon County, Alabama, is far from the centers of power. The subjects are black, poor, mostly uneducated. In the 1930s to 60s, such folks had little voice or visibility in national affairs. They weren't writing letters to newspapers or contacting congressmen. In their own community, the study's existence was known but likely misunderstood. Locals perhaps saw the PHS doctors come and go, heard about Miss Rivers' boys, and assumed these men were lucky to get free health care. To them, nothing nefarious was apparent. If a few suspected something off, why is Joe still sick after all these years of treatment? They had neither the platform nor the certainty to make it an issue. Racism and segregation also played a direct role. White media and institutions didn't scrutinize what was happening in black rural communities, and black media, if they had known, might have raised hell. But they didn't know either. However, inside the Public Health Service itself, ethical unease did surface from time to time. The earliest internal critic on record was Dr. Austin V. Dibert, a PHS venereal disease consultant, who as far back as the late 1930s reportedly questioned the scientific validity of the study. He pointed out that because some treatment had been given initially, even if inadequate, the study wasn't purely observing untreated syphilis. Thus, the results could be confounded. Dibert's criticism was technical, but underlying it may have been a moral concern too. If the data aren't even clear, why continue doing this to people? But such voices were few and easily overshadowed by those in charge, who were invested in continuing. In 1950, a notable dissent came from Dr. R. Moten Count Gibson, a black physician and professor in Virginia, not to be confused with Tuskegee's principal, Robert R. Moten. Gibson had gotten wind of the study details and was appalled. In 1955, he confronted Dr. Sidney Olansky, then one of the PHS leads on venereal disease research and oversight of Tuskegee. Gibson argued that the study was unethical and that these men should be treated at once. Olansky, representing the PHS view, essentially waved him off. The content of that conversation isn't fully recorded, but Olansky later remained a defender of the study. In fact, decades later, Olansky would justify the deceit with disturbingly paternalistic logic. He noted that the subjects being mostly illiterate helped the study because it kept them from reading newspapers and learning the truth. Such a statement reveals how consciously the PHS relied on the ignorance of the subjects to maintain the facade. Moving into the 1960s, social change is in the air. Civil rights movements challenge injustices across the South. The medical field, too, is slowly shifting toward more ethical oversight. The concept of informed consent is gaining traction after scandals like the thalidomide trials and radiation experiments come to light. In 1962, for instance, new federal regulations start requiring researchers to obtain voluntary consent for drug trials. This is a precursor to broader human subject protections. Yet even as research norms evolve, Tuskegee remains strangely insulated. This might be partly because it's considered an observational study rather than an experiment in the classic sense. The PHS doctors would argue they're just watching nature take its course and not actively giving a new drug or intervention, so they rationalize that informed consent rules, still nascent, don't quite apply. It's semantic hair-splitting that conveniently excuses them from updating their methods. But in 1965, a clear alarm bell rings. Dr. Erwin Schatz's letter. We touched on it in the previous act. Schatz, a young cardiologist, reads a scholarly article in the Annals of Internal Medicine about the Tuskegee study's 30-year findings. That article blandly recounted how dozens of men had died, gone blind or insane, etc., due to untreated syphilis, all presented without an iota of remorse or ethical reflection. Schatz is stunned. He drafts a pointed letter. He expresses outrage that no treatment was offered even after penicillin, calling the study morally unjustifiable and perhaps one of the sorriest chapters in medical history. He mails this to the authors, some of whom are PHS officials. The response within the PHS when this letter arrives is telling. Dr. Schatz's concerns are dismissed. A PHS doctor, meeting to discuss it, scribbles a note that Schatz is young and emotional and decides there will be no reply. They file the letter away. The cover-up doesn't always look like active lying. Sometimes it's simply the suppression of critique and self-censorship. By not responding, they avoid putting any ethical doubt on the record. They likely assume Schatz will just drop it. And indeed, occupied with his own career, he did not pursue the matter further at that time. The next internal challenge comes the very next year, 1966. Peter Buxton, a venereal disease investigator in the PHS based in San Francisco. Buxton hears colleagues gossip about an old study in Alabama. Curious, he digs up what he can. He obtains copies of those internal reports, and perhaps the same article Schatz read Buxton is troubled to his core. Unlike Schatz, Buxton works inside the public health service. Albeit at a low level, he's basically an interviewer who speaks with patients about their sexual contacts for contact tracing. Buxton writes a formal letter to the Division of Venereal Diseases in D.C., laying out point by point why the Tuskegee study is unethical and scientifically dubious. It's a bold move for someone not high in rank, effectively whistleblowing through internal channels. The response? The PHS bigwigs decide to convene a panel in 1969 to review the study. As previously mentioned, Buxton's memo forces their hand a bit. They can't ignore him as easily, since he's an employee raising a concern in official capacity. So they assemble a group of physicians and officials, many of whom, notably, are likely to be sympathetic to continuing the status quo. The panel meets, ironically, around the same time the Apollo 11 astronauts are landing on the moon. Here we have public health experts debating whether poor black men deserve treatment, a stark moral contrast in human achievement. They conclude, astonishingly, that while it might be uncomfortable, the study should go on until its natural conclusion, which they define as autopsies on all remaining participants. Perhaps to assuage a bit of conscience, they recommend some minor changes, maybe provide a few more benefits to the men, and make greater efforts to secure consent for autopsies. Consent is a sick joke at this point. These men still aren't being told why autopsies are needed. The panel's recommendation is accepted by the CDC, which by 1969 has absorbed the PHS's responsibilities. So in essence, Buxton's internal protest is heard, deliberated, and then effectively overruled. Imagine being Peter Buxton in 1969, hearing that the official verdict was to do nothing. He's frustrated. This is a man in his late 20s, morally awake in a tumultuous era. He's a bit of a counterculture fellow from accounts, a social conscience type. Buxton reportedly responds by saying, "Fine. If they won't listen internally, he'll have to go to the press." That threat perhaps doesn't reach the higher-ups or they don't take it seriously. At the time, Buxton leaves the PHS not long after to go to law school, but he doesn't forget Tuskegee. The cover-up, thus, is a combination of active deceit and passive complicity. Active deceit is what happened daily to the men in Alabama, lying to them about their health and treatment. Passive complicity is what happened in the broader public health community. People who heard whispers but shrugged it off. Institutions that had the power to intervene but didn't. Even the medical journals that published Tuskegee findings without comment share in this complicity. Those articles were reviewed by peers. None apparently questioned the ethics in print. Another layer. In the 1960s, America has prominent civil rights and black health advocates. How did none of them catch wind? It's possible that a few did. There is evidence that Dr. Bill Jenkins, a young black statistician at the PHS in the late 1960s, learned of Tuskegee around 1968. He was outraged and tried quietly to rally black colleagues. He started a newsletter called The Drum to discuss racism in health, and he alluded to Tuskegee in it, calling for an end to the study. But the Drum had limited circulation. Jenkins was a junior employee. His attempts didn't reach the press or powerful allies. The PHS in that era was not a welcoming place for an outspoken black professional criticizing a project. Many of the white higher-ups seemed oddly proud of Jenkins's efforts, like Schatz's and Buxton's, hit a wall. But these internal dissidents were accumulating, and that in itself is evidence that by the 1960s, the study's morality was indefensible to any fresh set of eyes. What about the wider government? Did any elected officials know? There's no clear evidence that Congress or the White House had specific knowledge of Tuskegee during those years. It was a mid-level public health program, not requiring special legislation or line item budgets that would draw attention. It was just quietly funded through the regular PHS budget in the 1940s and 1950s. Some funding might have come via grants or small allocations to Tuskegee Institute's hospital. But again, labeled innocuously, it's likely no one outside the health bureaucracy had enough detail to raise alarms. And those inside had a culture of secrecy on this. They knew what they were doing wouldn't play well in public, a telling anecdote. In the early 1970s, as Buxton was preparing to leak, he recalls how, at a party, a PHS official told him bluntly, "We can't let that story out. The newspapers would have a field day." This indicates awareness that what they were doing was not something they could defend to the public or political overseers, so they kept it quiet. One subtle aspect of the cover-up was language. The PHS researchers carefully framed their communications. In published papers, they never outright said, "We refuse treatment even after it was available." Instead, they might say, "No therapy was given, as the study was observational," or use passive voice. The men have remained untreated. They downplayed harm by citing, for instance, that not all syphilitics died. Some lived long lives, as if that justified not treating. Internally, they used euphemisms like calling the autopsy agreements special examinations and labeling the subjects as volunteers or participants, insinuating a legitimacy that was never truly there. By 1972, the cover-up is creaking under its own weight. Most of the original conspirators have retired or died. A new generation in public health might have ended it on their own, soon one hopes. But history didn't wait for them to do the right thing voluntarily. It took external shock. One final scene before the leak. In early 1972, Peter Buxton has finished law school. The memory of Tuskegee gnaws at him. He decides it's time to fulfill his earlier notion of telling the press. He contacts a reporter friend in San Francisco and shares some documents. The friend is interested, but perhaps busy or unsure how to proceed. That friend suggests reaching out to a more experienced investigative journalist. Through connections, Buxton's information finds its way to Edith Lederer, an AP reporter, and via her to Jean Heller. We saw this in our cold open, Lederer handing Heller the envelope at the Democratic Convention in Miami Beach. At this moment, the cover-up meets its nemesis, the Free Press. Before Act 4 details the journalistic breakthrough, let's consider the Tuskegee study might have continued a few more years until the last man died, quietly burying its own evidence. Those in power over it nearly succeeded in keeping it hidden under bureaucratic jargon and willful silence. They had countless chances to right the wrong, or at least stop it. In 1947, when penicillin emerged. In 1951, when one of their own questioned it. In 1965, 1966, 1968, when multiple individuals raised red flags. Each time they chose to prioritize the study over the subjects. This is the essence of the cover-up. It wasn't a single decision, but a series of decisions, again and again, to place scientific curiosity and perhaps personal pride or career investment above humanity and honesty. Act 3 closes with a sense of the tightening tension. The secret is leaking at the edges. A file of documents has been handed over in that manila envelope to a reporter who is now asking questions in corridors of the PHS. Perhaps someone gets wind that a journalist is sniffing around. A few uneasy phone calls might have been exchanged. What do we do if this goes public? The answer, as Act 4 will show, is that once the truth comes out, there is no more cover to hide under. The Tuskegee deception will stand naked before the world.
In a world built on hidden histories and half-truths, we've only just begun to peel back the layers. Because what you've heard tonight was never meant to be known, but you were meant to find it. If you're ready to go deeper, leave us a review, comment your thoughts, share this episode, and step inside the archives. Join the inner circle, where the real evidence is kept. This is the broken truth, because the truth isn't whole, it's broken.